If you notice anything special about this poem, it starts out with this. As I have gone alone in there, and with my treasures bold, I can keep my secret where, and hint of riches new and old. Begin it where warm waters halt, and take it in the canyon down. Not far, but too far to walk. Put in below the home of Brown. From there it is no place for the meek. The end is drawing ever nigh. There'll be no paddle up your creek, just heavy loads and water high. If you've been wise and found the blaze, look quickly down your quest to cease. But tarry scant with marvel gaze, just take the chest and go in peace. So why is it that I must go and leave my trove for all to seek? The answer I already know. I've done it tired and now I'm weak. So hear me all and listen good. Your effort will be worth the cold. If you are brave and in the wood, I give you title to the gold. What is it? Treasure map or treasure hunting thing. This comes from a poem in a larger book, and it's called The Thrill of the Chase. It's written by a guy named Forrest Fenn, who in this poem depicts where this buried treasure might be that he had accumulated over time, and he wanted to get this treasure map out for the world to try and find. And he said that these clues would lead to this treasure chest, and in this treasure, in this basket that he put all of it in, there was over 22 troy pounds of gold, coins, precious gems, and ancient artifacts. And at the time, it was valued at over $1 million. You can imagine when this book came out that it drew a lot of excitement, a lot of tension of, oh, where could this be? And they knew how much was in there, so they knew it would be worth looking for and trying to find. And the hard part about this poem is the author was very clear that it wasn't in any particular order that they were supposed to be looking for it, that they were joined together in different ways, and there was a specific way you were supposed to read the poem. The only clue he gave in the beginning is the first word saying, begin it where the waters halt. And from there, it was the treasure hunter's choice about how do we diagnose what this map, what these words mean, and how they need to go about finding it. Fenn had gotten this treasure together, and a hint that came up in an interview many years into this treasure hunt. This treasure hunt lasted over 10 years. In the interview, he said, the spot it is lying is where I'd like to die someday. He had actually just been diagnosed with cancer that was terminal, and he laid out this hint that this would be a great location that I'd love to lay my head at rest. People had been looking for that chest for about 10 years. Many people spent hours and days looking for it. Some even went bankrupt spending the time out there. And it became pretty unhealthy for some and all time consuming for others. There's one story of a guy who spent his life into it. He was a former cop from Seattle named Daryl Seiler. I probably didn't do that right. But he made the news originally by being swept down the river in the Yellowstone National Park while he was hunting for that chest. Now, the people had to come and rescue him on shore, or the cops and agents there had to go rescue him, and they were told, you're no longer to be in Yellowstone. Like, you get rescued once, and then I think you're kind of banned. Like, we're not going to do that again, right? And it wasn't more than a week later, and he was found doing the same thing. He had been swept down the river again. He must have been looking close to the river, I'm assuming. And he'd been swept down the river again, and he had to get rescued again. This time, he ended up in jail and being arrested for this. And because he was arrested and put in jail, he ended up losing his job, which because he lost his job and didn't continue to look for other work, he spent all his time treasure hunting. He ended up losing his house. So all of his possessions, he was able to put in 2 duffel bags. He threw those duffel bags into his truck, and that was all he had. While he was out treasure hunting one day, his truck got stolen. Right? And yet he did not stop. He continued after this treasure because he knew that if he found this, his life would be changed. His life would be different. That man never did end up finding that treasure. There was actually a different man, a Michigan man, who found the treasure that was buried in 2020. So it was hidden about 10 years. And we all like a good treasure story like this, right? We're excited about this. Has anyone ever listened to that? I think around Christmas, Jensen Jewelers does that like diamond hunt, that diamond ring hunt? Right, something of that nature. It slowly give clues out, and you're like, "Ooh, if I can get into this." Right? We enjoy treasure hunts. We enjoy the thought of finding something that's special, finding something that has value, and especially when it's something that not everyone can find. Right? We want to be the first to do this, and even if we aren't treasure hunters, we do treasure things. Right, there's things in our lives that we have right now that even if we're not looking for it, maybe if we've gotten it, we do treasure some specific things. We value things more than others. Like if your house was on fire, maybe you've been asked this question, what is one thing you would grab if you had the chance? I mean, that's what you treasure, right? That's what you put value in. For some of you, maybe it's something that can't be replaced easily. Maybe it's something that's sentimental. Maybe for some of you, it's a family member. Hopefully, you make sure they're out first before you go for stuff. But we all treasure things on earth, right? We all treasure different things. Maybe it's a vehicle. Maybe it's your house. Maybe it's things you put lots of time into, the way you dress, your clothes, a John Deere zero-turn mower, right? We all have things that we treasure and we enjoy. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the things that we treasure on earth. We've been in a series over the last few weeks on the Sermon on the Mount. And if you've been with us, you know this to be a story where Jesus is just starting to gain popularity. He's starting to get known for miracles and healing people. And people want to know what he's going to say. And he's gathered people on this mountain and delivers this sermon to his disciples and the people who are within earshot of it. And we're going to continue that today because Jesus, so far in the Sermon on the Mount, has spoken about, okay, many of you have been living in this way, but I challenge you to live better. I challenge you to live in a different way. I'm answering the things of the Old Testament, and I'm fulfilling these things, and this is now how you are to live because of that. And Jesus continues in that in Matthew 6. We're going to be in Matthew 6, 19 to 24. It says this, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Right? Treasures on earth. Man, anyone else feel like they have to go home and sell everything after the service today? Like we cannot value any of the things we find joy in. Right? That's kind of sometimes the mindset that we have, like, oh man, I just went shopping and I really enjoyed buying this thing. Or I've been working hard and saving up to buy this that will make my life easier, that'll make my life more enjoyable. And we don't want to hear verses like this because what is Jesus actually trying to tell us in this? Or should we not be allowed to do some of these things? Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moss and vermin destroy. Anyone grow up on the translation that said where moss and rust destroy? Anyone? That's typically how I initially read it first. But I think that more recently changed in 2015 when Ford came out with the aluminum body, right? And trucks no longer rusted anymore. And they're like, well, we have to change this idea of rust because people won't know what it is anymore. But that brings me to a story of my first truck. So when I was in high school, I saved up, and bought a Junker F-150. It was in 1998. It was rusted out, all the way through. And put tons of time on it. We put new rocker panels on it. I got a Southern truck box and just sanded it down so there was no dents. I got it repainted and just put tons of love and energy into this. And I named it Black Beauty at the end because I looked at it and was just so happy with it. It was beautiful to me. And I love this 1998 F-150. And it wasn't but a few years later that after a few Michigan winters, what happens? That rust started to speckle on it. You started seeing bubbles in the paint and you're like, oh no. Right? We being up here in Michigan know this understanding. It may not be in this translation, but we get that idea of the rust does destroy, right? Many of us drive vehicles that won't be around in 40 years because the weather, the elements around here, Earth will take back what it is, right? That it will not be what it once was. And we know this to be true. Things of this world rot and decay, and most of our possessions that we find value in 40 years will be in the landfill, and no one will find value in them. And yet, we treasure those things, don't we? Right? We find great value in a lot of these things. But Jesus says, do not store up. But why? Why doesn't Jesus want us to store up? Why can't we enjoy some of these things on earth? Why can't we save up and enjoy some of these things? I would argue that Jesus isn't saying that we shouldn't have earthly treasures. I don't think that's what he's speaking to here. That I don't think Jesus says like the stuff is intrinsically bad. I'd argue that's not what Jesus is speaking to here, but they do not bring us happiness or fulfillment for the long term. I think that's what Jesus is pointing us to. There's a survey done a few years ago where a lot of people were asked, what would it take to achieve the American dream? Right? What would it take for you to achieve the American dream money-wise? And there were a group of people who were in the bracket of $25,000 or less, so they were making $25,000 or less per year. And they were asked this question, and their response was, oh, if we could make $54,000 a year, that's about on average what they all answered. If we could make that much a year, oh man, we'd be living different. That would be the American dream. Another group of people were asked that same question, and these group of people had an annual income of just over $100,000. And they were asked, what would it take to get the American dream? Right? Is it achievable? What would it actually take to get to that point? And many of their responses were that they needed to make an average of $192,000 a year to achieve this American dream. Right? And you get this idea that, oh man, the person making $25,000, if he could make that $100,000 that person who's discontent is making, like, oh, they can do some incredible things, right? Like, life would be different. That would be living the dream. And what we see is that once you get to that point, it's like, oh, but if I could be making more, I could be doing way more, I would have much greater treasures. We're always chasing the next best thing. And we know that to be true in our lives. I know that to be true in my life. Once I finished that dream truck that I built in high school, I loved that for a few years. And then it's crazy. Every year, more new trucks come out with like new bells and whistles, and they're fantastic. And there's a thing called like heated steering wheel. So when your hands are cold in the winter, you just put your hand. It's wonderful. And my 1998 F-150 did not have that unless it was overheating, right? And we've got this idea like, and since that first truck, I have since then bought 3 dream trucks for myself because I love new trucks. I think they're fantastic and they do some incredible things, but they're only the dream truck for a few years, and then you look out and think, oh, there's a nice new fun one on the lot, right? We get this. We chase treasures in our lives, and once we have a treasure, something that we've worked for, something that we're excited about, it may fulfill us for a short time, right? But it's not long until that master of stuff says you need something else. You need something more. You need something different. This isn't going to be sustaining anymore. Right? We allow these longings for earthly treasures to dictate our lives. Our decision making, our priorities often revolve around how do we get to that treasure? But I don't know what that treasure is for you, but we can all fill in that blank, right? There's stuff in our lives that we want, that we think when we get there, oh, that's when it's going to be good, right? That's when we'll be able to accomplish a dream. The beautiful piece about this passage is that Jesus doesn't just say, don't do this. He actually gives us some language around what we're actually supposed to do. And he says this, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And he doesn't give us exactly what that looks like, but I think we can piece together what Jesus means in this. Because if we understand heavenly treasures, they're things that are everlasting and they do not rust, they do not break down, right? Varmints cannot get at them. And I first want to name here that sometimes when people read this passage, they look at it and be like, okay, so it sounds like what Jesus is saying is I have to have a boring, not fun life, and then I'll be rewarded in heaven. Right? I can't enjoy things in this life so that I can enjoy eternity in heaven. But I would argue that is not what Jesus is speaking about here. But we are going to be living a very countercultural life. Because it feels like you're supposed to live a bad life here on earth so you get to enjoy something in the future. But it's not that. You see, treasures in heaven give a real understanding that the things we do, the actions that we take, and the life we live are things that would be treasured in heaven. So instead of trying to think, okay, what are treasures in heaven, think more to this understanding of what would be treasured in heaven. What things would be celebrated by heaven because of the things that we do here today. What I've found when we start thinking in that posture, when we start having this understanding of, okay, what would be treasured in heaven, we actually find those very things to be fulfilling here. Last week we talked about some mission trips. We had a mission trip team came back, and they were just on fire, right? They were excited about what was going on. We had Sue come up and kind of explain that the team had gotten in late that morning, right, and they were exhausted. But you could see from some of the conversations I've had with those, they're breathing a new set of life, right? They're breathing fresh breath. They're excited about what is going on, and they may have needed a nap when they got home, but there's a new sense of life to what they were doing, right? They came back. And on that mission trip, when we think about mission trips, they're a lot of work, right? Like you have to take vacation. And when we take vacation from work, what we want to be doing is spending it on a cruise ship in the sun, laying on the beach, right? Or we want to be hiking in the mountains, or we want to be sitting in a tree stand attempting to kill something, right? That's how we want to take our vacations. But a mission trip like this, the people had to take vacation from their work, and they had to go to a place that was not familiar, and they served people in a really difficult way, right? They were building things, they were intentional about relationships they had. Nothing of that was really easy or vacation-like, and yet many of those people came back living a very different life, excited about what was going on, and a new perspective about what their life was like. All of a sudden, the things that they treasured look a little bit different, right? And I would argue that when we do things that will be treasured in heaven, we're actually given some treasures down on earth. Jesus, a few weeks ago, we had talked about how Jesus taught us to pray. And the words he used was, on earth as it is in heaven. That we should be praying that what happens in heaven gets brought down here on earth. And I think this is a light into that a little bit, where Jesus is saying, look at what is treasured in heaven. Do those things here. You can get a glimpse of what heaven is like when you participate in those kinds of things on earth as it is in heaven. So how do we do that? Right? How do we actually participate in that well, outside of going on lots of mission trips? Because that's not always an option for all of us, right? How do we do that here in the today world? How do we make sure our lives are filled with things that would be treasured in heaven? I found a great line this week that I think really paints a beautiful picture of languaging around this. It says this: we're meant to use possessions and love people, not love people and use possessions. Our eternal perspective affects our earthly priorities. I don't think it could be said any better, right? We're meant to use our possessions and love people, not love people and use, not love possessions and use people. Right? It's a beautiful understanding, right? Treasuring the things of heaven is actually achieved by loving people. I think that's one of the ways heaven rejoices is when we truly love people and we show people the love of Jesus Christ. And having the mindset of the things above to what would be treasured in heaven is the way we should be living. So when our house is on fire, we should be making sure everyone we love is out of it first before we start going for our things. Right? The relationships we have, people matter. The things that we have in our life should not matter as much as people. And it means that in order to love people and in order to love them well, I would argue that we're supposed to hold our things loosely, right? Hold the possessions we have, hold the things that we've worked hard for, the stuff that we have open in our hands, allowing not only God to use them, but people. And say, these things I cannot take with me. Right? You've heard the saying, you don't see hearses with a hitch behind them because they can't pull anything with them. Right? Like, hold your stuff loosely. This is not ours for the taking and the holding. We should be allowing ourselves to use our stuff for people and to better our relationship with people. Jesus... just a minute. And in order to love people, we have to hold those things loose. And my kids are starting to figure this out. It's a word called sharing. Right? Anyone just like, sharing. Right? What would it actually look like to go home and look through our house and be like, what could other people use that I'm not using right now? It could be our vehicles. It could be our boats. It could be things in the yard, tractors that other people would find helpful in different situations. Having a posture where we allow our stuff to not rule us only happens when we lose the grip on our stuff and allow God to do some incredible things with it. Jesus ends this section with these words. Verse 24, no one can serve two masters. Either you'll hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. See, in this, Jesus makes it very clear. There's no questioning how much we get to love one thing and how much we get to love another thing. There's no, I'm going to love my stuff 1/3 and I'm going to love God 2/3 because I'm still loving God more, so that should be enough. No, there is no gray area in what Jesus says here. You can only love one. You cannot serve both God and money. You can only be devoted to one of those. So I want to leave you with some questions today. I want to leave you with a few questions. What or who, hopefully it's towards the who, is your master? Right? What gets your time? Where are you devoting your time and energy? Are you devoting as much time to God and devotion and to prayer and to worship as you are going over the spreadsheets for a budget and looking when you can pay things off or when you can afford things or how to make things fit? Right? Are you playing the ratio game of loving things in the wrong places? Do you spend more time out on a boat than you do with Jesus? Right? How much value are you putting on your things? If you were to lose all of it, would your life be ruined? Right? If we took a survey and everything had to be gone from your life, would it be okay? Would you survive that, or wouldn't life be worth living anymore? How much priority do you put on your stuff? Back when I was growing up, the phrase YOLO was very relevant. Is that still a thing? Ish. Or am I just aging myself? We'll just pretend I'm aging myself. So YOLO, you only live once, right? You only live once. And there's this understanding that with that saying, people would post them doing like crazy things or buying new stuff and saying, you only live once, like YOLO, we got to enjoy it while we have it. And there is some truth in that. Right? You do only live once in this world. And many of us have this mindset of, okay, if we are only living once, then we should enjoy it to the utmost that we can with the stuff that we have. But you only live once also rings true spiritually. You can only make some decision once, right? You can only live on this world once. There are people in our world that need to hear the good news about Jesus Christ, and we may be that person for them. You only live once. So we have a choice about how we're going to live today. We can choose to focus our lives on things that are temporary, things that will rust, things that will get destroyed. But God offers us a treasure that will last forever. Right? Jesus, who's giving these words out, will slowly, over the course of his 3 years in ministry, explain to the people that he is the one they've been looking for. He is the Messiah, the Redeemer, the one that the Old Testament has spoken about over and over again, has prophesied about, and he holds the true treasure. The treasure of eternal life with God our Father. And Jesus is saying, do not treasure the things of this world, because he knew what was coming. He knew what actually brought life. So we should be looking at our lives and saying, okay, how much do we put value? How much value do we put in our things and our stuff that no one else will find value in 50 years? And are we putting enough work? Are we putting enough time into treasuring the things that heaven treasures? I want to end today with the ending of the story of the treasure hunter. The treasure of Forrest Fenn, after the Michigan man found it. You can just picture yourself, he found it on his own, right? You can imagine after just years of searching and reading through the poem and looking at interviews with this guy, trying to articulate what exactly he meant, and then going to the spot and uncovering the treasure that so many people had been searching for. Right? You can imagine the completeness he probably felt in his life. All of the things in his life were leading up to this moment, and he found it. You would think that that treasure would sit on his mantle forever and ever and be the focal point of all of his life. But yet, a few years later, he ended up selling all of it. He originally wanted to keep it, but he was getting so much. He had people suing him. He had people bothering him. And all of a sudden, this treasure that he once thought would bring him so much life and value actually brought him the opposite. It did not fulfill his life. It did not complete his life because it was stuff. Right? We know that. We know that to be true, and yet we get sucked into this idea of the master of stuff will require more and more of us. You cannot serve both the master of stuff and God. You cannot serve both God and money. The question is, where are you going to place your treasure? Right? We have got hundreds of years of illustrations and stories about people who have chosen wrong, that people have valued the wrong things. Jesus is clear. We cannot serve both God and money. We cannot have two masters. Who is your master? Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. And we thank you for this story and the way Jesus speaks not only thousands of years ago to these people, but also speaks to us today. God, we know that in this world we value a lot of things, and a lot of stuff in our lives takes control. And we know that the devil uses our stuff to distract us from the way you're speaking and the way you may be trying to move in our lives. And God, I just ask that you help us see what we do with that. And if it means that we need to sell some things, if it means we have to get rid of some of the distractions of stuff to focus more on you, God, I ask that you're clear and you guide us in what a relationship with stuff looks like in a relationship with you and what that means for our lives. God, we ask that you guide us in that and help us make the right decision to treasure only you and to build treasures that will be treasured in heaven. We ask this in your name we pray. Amen.